This video is about tearing your paper and registration. Registration refers to lining up your image to your Linocut block. For that, they sometimes use what's called a target. I made one here. It's like where you've drawn around your plate and then measure out a certain distance. In this case, I have 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, 2.5 inches. They always put a little more at the bottom in Western framing and presentation because it gives a little lift, lifts it up on the wall because gravity is pulling everything down. And to give it a feeling of defying gravity, having a little bit more room on the bottom is very helpful and is pretty much the standard. Japanese tradition leaves even more space on the bottom. Also gives you room to sign on the bottom without making the bottom seem more heavy than the top. So the way this particular one has been arranged is so I can line up paper to this other target. I usually pick one or the other, and I always pick the top to line it up really well. And then, in this case, for black and white print, I would make a compromise between the top and the side so that it was the best it could be on 2 sides. And then I would start to print. From the center out. They do from the center out so it'll stretch. If it stretches a long ways, you can end up with a double image at the far end. So the shorter the stretch, the better. Once you get it kind of laid down, you can kind of work different corners and work all around printing. Another way that people register, I'm going to move this template because it's better to not even have it here for this, is sometimes for a bleed print, they'll use the block itself, lining it up to the top, and then so it barely reaches the side. In this case, if it's lined up at the top, I don't even care if it's like this over here, because that just shows that my paper is torn crooked, right? As long as it just reached the side, just barely. And also, if you've laid it down, you don't want to move it again. You can always tear any little bit off later. There might be a little bit behind to tear off later. So let's try it again. Line it up to the top. This is after it's been inked, but you could check it out beforehand too. All right. So to the top, and I will just use the left side. So for the print I'm actually going to print, it will be similar. This doesn't really have ink on it yet. If it did have ink on it, I'd still line it up to the top. Move it off to the side. For black and white, and again, this is lined up to the top, so I'm not worried about that. It's touching the side. I tore my paper ever so slightly crooked. Now I'm going to do a little bit of paper tearing. I'm going to use the block that I'm printing to figure out the sizes. I want it to go here. Make sure I'm inside the frame. So I could either mark with a few dots with a pencil, I'm going to use a tearing bar, but you could just draw a line and cut with your X-Acto knife, especially for this projects at home. But make sure you have something underneath your paper if you're cutting with X-Acto knife. You don't want to put a cut in your table, right? So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and mark it. Boom, boom. Then I'm going to move down to the second half of it. Do the same thing. Put this up. I'm putting this up against the top marks. Also up against my block. Your paper could be just a tiny bit smaller than your block. It's almost better if it was smaller than larger. You tear with a kind of tension toward you. You can't have it loose or it'll just tear chunks out of it. It's got to lean toward you and have some tension. Good. Lightening this up a little bit. Okay. If I marked it, I could tear just on the inside of that line. If I like this decal edge, you could have it at the bottom of my print. The decal edge is where the water has splashed the paper out thinner because they made it by hand. The block is thick enough to stop this bar from moving forward, so I can use the block to stop the bar. So my paper is prepared for printing. Now, if you do a bleed print, I think this is set up correctly so I could show you something. You can see this print. It's kind of a nice print, right? It's not actually printed on this other background paper. It's totally not. It's separate. Also, you can see that when you're printing on Oriental paper, the ink comes right through a little bit. That's why it's a good paper to use, because you can see when you're done printing. You actually could see if I missed a spot while I'm printing. So this is the way bleed prints are like mounted, not where little tape is behind it when it's framed. And if there is a frame, the frame can just come like that, the mat, I mean, the upper mat, and still be done just like any other picture. So and actually then it keeps your border clean. I could put it on different colored backgrounds. Choose later. So it's not bad to have bleed prints, although there's more effort put into the presentation later because you have to find the backing sheet for it and such like that, or put it in a matted frame. But it does make it seem more painterly too, like, you know, paintings don't have a border. Borders can look very good though on prints. I'm going to show you just a few really kind of awesome color prints, more just for the idea of like printmaking history, and in case you do more advanced printmaking later, you can see that relief really does offer a lot of unique potential.